Last Monday, I got on a 6 a.m. flight to New York. Now, keep in mind, I'm a mid-level manager at a Fortune 1000 company in a business that generates roughly 11% of the revenue. I get on this 6 a.m. flight, I go to New York, I can stay in whatever hotel I want to stay in, but I stay in the club quarters, and not even the closest club quarters to the office, the one that's a mile and 1.1 miles away. Grabbed dinner that night at Chopped, which is basically a Just salad. And then on the way home to LaGuardia, I catch the E train, transfer to the Q70 bus that takes you into LaGuardia. Now, why would I do that? Because when you're transitioning between companies, one of the rules that I would strongly suggest, if you're going to be somebody who's flexible enough to work in a big company or a little company, a startup, is keep your expectations at the minimum. So I could travel way above the means that I travel now, but and I'm training my staff to do the same thing, I hold them to the same standard I do, want the flexibility. You don't want to get used to a lifestyle that you're going to have to adjust to down the road. So you don't get to travel and stay at the Hilton or the Conrad and pick your best flights and take Uber and taxis everywhere if you're at a startup. So that's one of the first lessons is on a professional level, maintain the standard that you want to be able to carry through your career. Lesson number 2, and just to give you some background, in 2005, I was working at a mid-level software company, trading software company. And I walked into my boss's office and I said, here's my notice. I'm leaving to go do this startup. And the startup is an industry analyst firm called IATA Group. They're still around. And then I went home and I told my wife, I'm going to take this enormous pay cut and do this startup. Not a great conversation. But walked out of a well-paying job at a good company and did this industry analyst startup. I'd never been an industry analyst before. I had no idea what that meant. It was kind of like being a product manager without a product line, so I knew how to do that. And we started this company, and it's still going today. Some of you in capital markets may read some of the research that comes out of that firm. Created this capital markets practice, wrote about all these topics, did all this really interesting consulting, and my first project through the CME group was actually when I was working at that firm. We did this project that came out of a speaking event like this, where I introduced somebody from Nasdaq to somebody at CME group, and they decided they were going to do this joint microwave project, which doesn't exist anymore. Then I went to work for Nasdaq. So left this little company that I'd helped start to go to this big company. And at the big company, we did this product called FinCloud R3. And FinCloud R3, my partner at that is now running the Amazon Financial Services vertical. So Amazon listed on Nasdaq, they still do. And we did this cloud project back in 2013. At the time, it was pretty innovative. Now it's basically Glacier Vault Lock. Did the same thing again. Got back from a speaking event in Tokyo, walked into my boss's office and said, you know, I want to go back and do another startup. And so I started my own company, a one-man band. There's 2 of them coming up. And so even at Nasdaq, I had maintained the startup. You know, I had a really nice expense account there. But I stayed in the club quarters. I flew the cheap flights. I ate the cheap meals. And it was because I had to have the flexibility. I knew that was part of my DNA. And started this product strategy consulting firm. And one of the reasons I knew I could do it was the experience that I'd gathered from the IATA Group experience and the lessons that I learned there. And one of the first lessons was to manage my finances. So when we built IATA, the first thing that the partners did was build a 6-month run rate, build a cushion. So for those of you who are vacillating between, do I work for a big company, do I want to work for a startup, one of the things you need to understand about yourself is how you manage your personal finances. And a lot of people don't talk about that. But if you want the flexibility to go to a startup, You can't do that with 2 car payments and a mortgage at the top of your rate and credit card debt. If you want to be able to go to a startup, that's not your lifestyle. So make sure as you're entering the workforce that you're managing your personal finances, because you need to have the flexibility to be able to walk into that boss's office, lay down that resignation, and know you're not going to be homeless. There's an article yesterday about a guy who was in San Francisco with his resume out. Please take a resume, homeless. Like, have a cushion. Be smart about your personal finances. Because if you want to go between small companies and big companies, you have to be able to manage that. Because one of the great things about a big company is it's generally nice and safe. The paychecks show up. You don't worry about them bouncing. The benefits are great. But when you leave that big company, and if you've got a family like I do, and all of a sudden you're paying $1,800 a month for medical, you better have it. So start early, start strong, live below your means. Okay? That's my second tip. So my third tip is develop critical skills. Skills that translate between companies. So the difference between a startup and a large company is in a startup, you build before you buy. So you have the ability to experiment. You have the ability to be flexible, to adapt, to change your value proposition. And we could do that. And early on we had different mechanisms for what we had hoped to achieve in these businesses. And they changed over time. In both times that I've done that, what I ended up with was not what we started out with. And that's great and it's fun. But you get to try and then you figure out if somebody buys. In a big company, it's the opposite. You have to get people to buy before you can try. And what I mean by that is you have to build consensus. And at a large company, it's an internal sales pitch. You have to get people to believe because there's a million priorities. And one of the things you have to be careful of through that process is to understand the difference between being confident and being cocky. Because the confident person is going to build consensus. The cocky person is going to build resentment. And there's a fine line there. And I learned this the hard way as an industry analyst. People were paying me for advice. As a product strategist in my own consulting firm, people were paying me for advice. So you had to walk in and convey confidence. You believed in what you were telling somebody. But when you cross that line, it actually kills your credibility. So just keep that in mind and sort of do an internal gut check. So as you're doing the selling at a big company, the other thing you have to keep in mind is the big company does just fine without you. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. I walked into CME Group. CME Group, we are a cash-rich company. I mean, it is a business model that works. And if I walk in there and I've got ideas and I say, you know what, I can improve this, I can improve that, and I get frustrated because it takes a little longer than I thought it was going to take, or somebody doesn't think it's a priority and I think it is, well, it's probably not a priority against the grand scheme of things. So I have to work within the constraints of that company. And a lot of that has to do with the attitude that I have. And I had to learn attitude too, because the attitude at a big company and a small company is very different. At a big company, there's 2 ways you can look at things you're trying to accomplish. Either everybody you work with is against you and they hate new ideas, and pick any big company, this is not CME specific, that's the way you're going to flame out. The other way you can look at it is as a challenge. You know what? This company is structured to weed out people who are not convicted. This company is structured to weed out the bad ideas. So they're going to put up roadblocks, and they're going to test me. And they're going to try to figure out, how convicted am I in what I'm trying to accomplish? How much do I believe in the idea I'm trying to put forward? Because they're going to put up a roadblock. And if you stop at that roadblock, you don't believe in your idea. You just prove to them you don't believe in your idea. You don't believe it's any more of a priority than they do. So part of your building consensus is to be convicted and to not stop at that wall, to take the step to the right, to go forward over here. Or maybe to back up and go, I didn't build consensus. So I didn't buy before I got my try. So what do you do to build consensus? you build your circle of trust. So, how many of you have watched American Idol? I don't watch like the whole series, but I love the beginning parts. What happens at the beginning? There are some people who need serious improvement. There are some epic fails who show up and try out for that show. And part of the reason that they do that is they didn't build their circle of trust. They didn't build a community of people around them who gave them good advice. Because somebody at some point should have felt safe enough to go, you know what? I've heard Banshees sing better than you. You should not go on that show. It's a circle of trust. Who do you trust to give you good advice? And I had the luxury of being an industry analyst, so I built a great network. I mean, it's the dream job if you're going to build a network because you get everybody's business card. But you have to figure out who in that community is going to give you good advice. The other thing that you have to build as part of that is a thick skin. So there's no safe spaces when you're trying to build critical thinking. Make sure that these are people who feel comfortable enough to give you sound advice. When you're at the small company, these are the people who are going to help you adjust and pivot and turn to meet the demand of the market. When you're at a big company, these are the people who are going to go, okay, that's a really great idea, but this company has these 6 things going on, and frankly, they're probably more important. So you're going to have to be patient. You're going to have to change your expectations. So it can be a lot of fun at both. You know, the scale at which you get to operate at a big company, I mean, the market data that we produce goes around the world. It is the global benchmark for pricing. So we get it into interesting places, and people do interesting things with it. And hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if you include retail, seeing our data every day. And that's awesome. And at a small company, you might have a much smaller scale, but you get to be a lot more nimble. So you get to have a higher value impact. You can step up and say, there's nobody doing this. I will do this. You know, when I was at IATA Group, I had to learn how to be a Salesforce administrator. I had to learn how to use SharePoint. I had to do all these things because there's nobody else at the company to do them. So you learn your skills there. Throughout your career, you're going to have these trade-offs, and you're going to enjoy both of them in different capacities, and you're going to learn from both of them. But just make sure that you have prepared yourself to have the mental attitude to work in either scenario, the financial wherewithal to change between those scenarios, and that you've built a circle of trust of people who can support you through either of those experiences.